Bob and I are on the Cumberland Trail on the Brady mountain section, and we're at the Grassy Cove Overlook. And I think without hyperbole, you'll find this to be one of the most beautiful overlooks that you've ever seen. It reminds me of a smaller Cades Cove. It looks like Tennessee a century ago. This beautiful farmland is a limestone window. It's actually a sort of continuation of Sequatchie Valley, and I understand that the water here drains underground into Sequatchie Valley drainage. So it is just spectacular. Now, we've come up the Cumberland Trail about 1,000 feet to get to this overlook, and the trail is somewhat rugged in sections, but clear and easy to follow. And what a wonderful payoff. It's roughly 2.5 miles to this point, so you could come here and go back for a nice 5-mile round trip, moderate to moderately strenuous, but what a nice view into Tennessee, into this beautiful little mini Cades Cove. So this is Grassy Cove. I think this might be an outstanding destination for a hike, and this vista is second to none. An interesting problem in evolution is how do closely related species whose ranges overlap stay reproductively isolated? And there are a variety of ways. And one of the ways is on display right here as I stand between two closely related species of pine tree. Now, right in front of me is a white pine, and right behind me is a Virginia pine. And in pine tree reproduction, what you're probably used to thinking of as a pine cone is in reality a female pine cone. So back in here, I've got female pine cones. What comes to your mind as a pine cone? But that's a female pine cone. Male pine cones also exist, but they're temporary. They're deciduous. Male pine cones make pollen by the tons. A big white pine, just a little one, a big one, can fill a pickup truck twice with pollen in 1 year. And that's why people that have allergies to trees suffer so much. What I want to show you here, I'm just going to take a little piece. These little tan structures make pollen. So when you take a tree full, these are little pollen makers, little male pine cones. But they'll be on this tree for a total of a couple of weeks. Then they fall off and they're gone and you never see them. So these are just now beginning to release pollen. They're releasing pollen right now. When I touched the tree, I could see a puff of pine pollen. And behind me are the female pine cones, the male pine cones of Virginia pine, and they're completely dehydrated. All the pollen is gone. So how do these two species stay isolated? They reproduce at different times. This is earlier in spring. This is later in spring. By the time the receptive female for the white pine is ready to receive pollen, the pollen from the Virginia pine is gone. And the only pollen in the air, or primarily, is white pine pollen. The same earlier, when the female cone of the Virginia pine is ready, there's no white pine pollen, hasn't formed yet. So what we're seeing is temporal isolation. If you reproduce at different times, then you don't, even closely related species, don't interbreed, don't produce sterile hybrids, for example, and are able to keep themselves as species isolated over time.